Welcome everybody to a new webinar organized by the Institute for European Policy Making. The YEP, as we call it, was inspired by Mario Monti and is hosted by Bocconi University. And it has the mission to combine the analytic rigor and of a research institute with the policy impact of a think tank. The director is Daniel Gross, who is here with us, and maybe he will be part of the conversation at the end of the first part of the debate. My name is Stefano Feltri. I'm a journalist working with the Institute for European Policy Making as communication advisor. If you are interested in what the YEP does, please subscribe our newsletter on the website. And also you can check the list of the next webinars. We have the next one in March on carbon pricing. So today I have the opportunity to introduce and moderate this conversation between two very distinguished guests. One is a YEP fellow, Marcello Messori. He's a part-time professor at the Schumann Center of the European University Institute and a member of the EMU Lab at the same center. He's a non-resident fellow at the Institute for European Policy Making, and he's also coordinator for the Gruppo Europa at Astrid Foundation, and maybe there are some people from Astrid with us. He will present the policy brief he wrote for the YEP. It's a first assessment of the Stability and Growth Pact from a very specific perspective. He will tell you more about this, but it's from the perspective of contract theory. And then we have Lucretia Reiklin. You all know her, but we are very thankful to her finally with us. And she is a professor of economics at London Business School, and also a fellow at Bruegel. And she was director of General of Research at the European Central Bank, among many other appointments. She will discuss Marcello's presentation. This will take 25-30 minutes maximum, and then we will open the floor for Q&A. So feel free to write your question in the chat, and then we will either read the question, either give you the floor afterwards, depending on time and on the content of the question. So thank you again. And Marcello, the floor is yours.
Many thanks, Stefano, and I'm very glad to have this possibility to discuss my paper on new fiscal rules with you. Let me immediately specify the aim of the paper. The paper analyzes the different steps in the evolution of fiscal rules in the European Union, and specifically it focuses on three different steps. First of all, the old Stability and Growth Pact, or better saying, the version of the Stability Pact as specified in the period 2005-2013. Then, as you know very well, the Stability Pact was in fact suspended. Hence, the final decision was to restart with operative central fiscal rules from the beginning of 2044 and 24, and the European Commission preparing the restarting of centralized fiscal rules made two proposals. The first one, November 2022, by means of a communication, and then in April 2023 by offering a normative setting. Then there was a discussion in the European Union Council, and finally, a few days before last Christmas, the Council approved the so-called new fiscal rules. Hence, my idea is to compare these three different settings of fiscal rules. To do that, I try to utilize contract theory. Before entering into the main core of the paper, let me specify that a few days ago, there was a further step in the evolution of the fiscal rules, in the sense that the European Parliament, the European Commission, and the Council reached an agreement, a provisional agreement, the so-called trilogue, in order to arrive to the final approval of the new fiscal rules. Hence, the idea is to have the final vote by the Council and the European Parliament, at least for a part of the new fiscal rules, that is, the rules referring to the preventive arm, and then before European elections to have these rules operative. Better saying, member states should define their national plans of fiscal adjustments, which are at the core of the new fiscal rules, by the end of September 2024. This is the idea. So, in order to appreciate the changes in the fiscal rules, let me specify. Pardon me, I have some problems with slides, but nevertheless, let me specify how to compare the different steps in the definition of fiscal rules. I utilize a very simple model of principal agents, a model with incomplete information and moral hazard, or better saying, moral hazard with hidden actions. For reasons that I will specify immediately, the focus is on the incentive compatibility constraint. And the main results of my paper are the following one. First, I can maintain that the old Stability and Growth Pact has a contractual design, which doesn't include an incentive compatibility constraint. And the opposite, the European Commission's proposal has a binding incentive compatibility constraint. This also applies to the new rules, but sometime in the new rules, the incentive compatibility constraint is not binding. So the problem is to be aware why it's so important to have a binding incentive compatibility constraint. And from this point of view, it's sufficient to recall you some few basics of principal agent models in order to become aware why it's so important to refer to a binding incentive compatibility constraint. As you know very well, in the case of incomplete information with moral hazard, each agent aims at maximizing her expected utility, and in order to reach this result, the agent undertakes actions that affect the outcome of the principle. Obviously, the principle has the aim of maximizing his outcome. Nevertheless, the principle is unable to perfectly monitor and to check ex post the actions undertaken by the agent. So, in this setting, let me make a very extreme assumption. That is, let me assume that the principle decides not to include in the contract a binding incentive compatibility constraint. In this case, the consequence is quite obvious. The agent will select ex ante the actions which are preferred by the principal in order to be fully compliant with the contract, but ex post, the agent will have the interest of defeat from her ex ante commitment in order to maximize her utility. So this is the core, a very simple core of my paper. And let me also specify that in order to apply this very simple model to fiscal rules, I assume that the European Commission acts as the principal on behalf of the European Union, whereas member states act as agents. I could discuss at length this assumption. I can confess you that some of the readers of my paper criticized this assumption, maintaining that particularly with the new rules and the Commission proposals, is inappropriate to assume that the European Commission acts as principal. Nevertheless, we could discuss this point, but let me specify that this is my assumption, and I guess that it's a correct assumption. So now let me try to apply this scheme to the three different steps in the evolution of the fiscal rules. And let me first refer to the Stability and Growth Pact. At the origin, as you know very well, the Stability and Growth Pact was centered on very simple rules, two specific rules, that is a maximum threshold in the public debt on GDP ratio and a maximum threshold on the public deficit on GDP ratio, respectively 60% of GDP and 3% of GDP. These two rules implied a pro-cyclical fiscal policy. Hence, in the period 2005-2013, European institutions introduced a new set of complex indicators in order to overcome these problems. That is the pro-cyclical impact of fiscal policy. And in order to do that, the medium-term objective, the debt rule, were introduced. The main features of these new indicators are that often they were unachievable for countries with significant fiscal disequilibria, and moreover, they were not observable, even ex post, by the European Commission and the other European institutions. In any case, we can state that the method of the Stability and Growth Pact was founded on rule-based principle. How translate this result in terms of contract theory? I can maintain that the Stability and Growth Pact supplied a very standard contract with a fully centralized enforcement. The principle maintained that the expected outcome was the fully compliance by the agent, even ex post. Hence, there was no enforcement of fixed rules in a situation of incomplete information. The result is quite clear-cut. That is, the binding incentive design doesn't work. This incentive design would be required in order to incentivize agents to pursue actions in the interest of the principal. Hence, we can conclude that the Stability and Growth Pact implied an ineffective enforcement. The opposite applies, in my view, to the opposite apply to the proposals made by the European Commission. The main features of the Commission proposals the main feature is the national ownership. That is, each member state determines its fiscal adjustment under the constraints of debt sustainability. This constraint is discussed with the Commission and must be compatible with very few quantitative indicators, and it should assume the old maximum thresholds, that is fiscal debt, public debt on GDP and public deficit on GDP as long-term or medium-term thresholds. That is, in a sense, they must utilize these as focal points. In this setting, the bet is to be able to combine the possibility to have an economic growth and to reach a fiscal stability. It's important to stress that in the Commission proposals, the fiscal rules are founded on risk-based principle. In this setting, each member state has a poor convenience to withdraw ex post from its ex-ante commitment, in the sense that any alternative would be worse than the alternative set by means of the national ownership. Hence, at least in my reading, European Commission was able to design a contract with the binding incentive compatibility constraint. And in this sense, it worked from the contract theory point of view. Now let me switch, and this is my final step, to the new fiscal rules. As you probably already know, the new fiscal rules are a compromise between the old Stability and Growth Pact and the proposals made by the European Commission. The new fiscal rules are still centered on national ownership. However, they add a number of quantitative indicators, the so-called safeguards, that more or less reproduce some of the indicators characterizing the old Stability and Growth Pact, even if at less binding constraints. For instance, it's quite clear that some quantitative indicators relating to the decrease in the public debt reproduces the old debt rule, and the quantitative indicator relating to a maximum structural public deficit on GDP reproduces the old medium-term objective. Hence, the new rules, the new fiscal rules, are able to supply a contract with a binding incentive compatibility constraints, but sometimes this constraint is undermined by the quantitative safeguards. Hence, my general conclusion is that new fiscal rules represent an improvement with respect to the old Stability and Growth Pact. However, it's a lost opportunity towards the proposals made by the European Commission. Obviously, it would be possible to better specify and raise a number of specific questions. Let me just list, in order to spare time, the number of possible questions to discuss. We could, for instance, enter into some details relating to the main safeguards. We should discuss the role played by the so-called debt sustainability analysis made by the European Commission in order to check the sustainability of the national public debts. Let me, from this point of view, just recall that one of the main results of the trialogue was to redenominate the SA in terms of reference trajectory. And due to the fact that in my reading, the SA is not binding for each of the member states, it seems to me that the new label is more appropriate. Then we should discuss the implication of the risk-based principle. Could also take into account one of the features of the new fiscal rules, that is the presence of a temporary regime, which allows for the first years slower fiscal adjustments by all the member states with fiscal disequilibria. And in particular, in the Italian case, the temporary regime matters a lot in my view. This is the core of my presentation, and hence I stop here.
Okay, thank you, Marcello. It was very interesting, and I also have to add that Marcello sent the first draft of this paper just hours after the preliminary agreement on the Stability and Growth Pact. So it's probably the most in-depth analysis that you can have with such a short notice. Now, I'm very curious of what Lucrezia thinks of this presentation, and especially maybe if she can add her opinion on how difficult it is to understand the impact of these rules. I mean, it's almost, I think, Bruegel had to publish maybe 40 or 70 pages long paper just to make some estimations. So I wonder how governments, and not to mention voters, are supposed to deal with such a complex architecture. But this is my question for Q&A. Lucrezia, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Marcello, for the presentation, and Stefano for the invitation. Indeed, I think for those of the audience who have not followed the details, it's going to be really difficult to follow this discussion, because just the presentation of the rules, okay, as a background, would take quite a lot of time. So we will have to assume that people more or less know what these rules are about. I think what is interesting about the paper is that it provides a new perspective from the usual macro perspective on this rule, and the perspective based on contract theory and mechanism design. So summarizing, the old Stability and Growth Pact was sort of a top-down, one-size-fits-all type of approach. Therefore, beside, the quantitative parameters, it was ill-designed as the central thesis of Marcello. It was ill-designed from the principle of a good contract between the principal, the European Commission, and the agents, the member states. So there was no incentive to comply, and this is why it resulted in non-compliance. Most countries were non-compliant, exposed, and also in complexity. And the complexity was to the fact that this pact was ex ante too stringent, and so it had to be kind of refined over time in order to make it credible. The November 2022 proposal by the Commission, it's a big departure from this conceptual framework. And as Marcello says, the big departure is the fact that it involves ownership by the member states, because the member states have to present a medium-term plan to the Commission, and their ideas on how to adjust, subject to the constraints that the debt has to remain sustainable. And so the center of this, of the conceptual framework, is the debt sustainability analysis, which is overseen by the European Commission. So the center is ownership, and at the same time, the concept that the debt sustainability analysis is what matters from a monetary union perspective in, in providing, a certain amount of fiscal responsibility. And then, I mean, for that perspective, the fact that certain quantitative parameters stayed, for example, the deficit reduction rules for countries with deficit above 3%, etc., was, is kind of not that important in judging how good this new conceptual framework is, because the key thing is that the ownership provides the incentive to cooperate. And so, from a contract design perspective, this is good, okay? And so this kind of quantitative parameters are justified by the fact that, however, there is incomplete information or myopic member states. So, some extra stuff has to be put in, okay? So from that perspective, we went from a one-size-fits-all type of framework from one risk-based approach, as Marcello calls it. So, and the key in judging the reform is what is important, what is really important is to what extent this is an effective contract in providing, so it's the structure of the contract is effective in providing the right incentive to the member states, okay? So this is not a macro perspective, it's really a micro perspective. Now, from a macro perspective, on the other hand, I would say what is important is the fact that this is centered on debt sustainability, okay? Because debt sustainability, it is really what matters for the function of the monetary union. Because if a country default, this has there are kind of externalities for the rest of the member states, and so it provides this pillar, the debt sustainability analysis, but also it kind of responds to the problem that the debt sustainability requirement is not enough, because it puts no structure on the adjustment path. And there are trade-offs, because if you introduce a structure in the adjustment path, this may create rigidities which actually may interfere with the good functioning of fiscal policy. So the solution of this trade-off is to translate the debt sustainability requirement into a medium-term adjustment requirement, in principle coherent with the growth strategy. So this is the other pillar of the Commission proposal, and then a commitment to adjustment in the form of a net expenditure path. Okay, so instead of a deficit path, a net expenditure path, and then it introduces also, which is I think is quite important, escape clauses in the face of large shocks. So good idea from the contract theory perspective, but also from the macro perspective. Now, in April, however, already in April 2022, the Commission introduced a new version, which unfortunately was not as good because it was a concession to the especially to German concerns. And so in the April proposal, the Commission introduced some safeguards, the deficit and debt safeguards. And after that, the ECOFIN December 2023 compromise is basically more or less that idea, okay? So there is not a big departure from that idea, except for this extra flexibility in lengthening, the phase before getting into the steady state part of the reform, which was a concession to France, which was very penalized by the safeguards. And so, okay, but this is kind of, I wouldn't make a big deal out of that because this is really like is the usual market of politics in this kind of meetings. So, in exchange for getting the consensus on the safeguards, France, was granted some flexibility, which helped Macron, in the pre-electoral cycle. Okay, so that was December 2023. And then now, new step, the negotiation with the parliament. And so we have now a new version. But basically, I would say that the parliament lost on all grounds. So the parliament originally wanted only the debt safeguards and not the deficit safeguards. And instead, it got both. It obtained a little bit of concessions on investment, but actually from the preliminary calculations, it doesn't make any difference. Okay, so that unfortunately for the parliament, that they always mean well, they were not very effective in the negotiations. Okay, so I agree with Marcello that although we started from a good concept from both a contract theory perspective and a macro perspective, with the introduction of the safeguards, we have sort of killed it, okay? We're still in a better situation than the old Stability and Growth Pact, both conceptually, but also quantitatively. And there, Bruegel has made some calculation, which actually I presented at the meeting of ECOFIN in Santiago in November, which actually showed that the new, even with the safeguards, the new pact is actually much less imposing, less stringent in terms of the quantitative adjustment for the euro area as a whole, but in particular for Italy, actually, unlike some of the things that Italian commentators have said. Now, the safeguards are bad for Marcello's criteria from a point of view of the contract design, but also they are bad in general for macro criteria because they are either redundant, they don't make any difference because the DSA is already quite stringent, or damaging. Okay, so we want to understand whether they are redundant, yes or no, and to what extent they are damaging. And here I would depart from the contract perspective and I say damaging in what sense? And from a macro perspective, damaging for me, it means procyclicality, or a too stringent fiscal stance and, incompatible with the strategic investment that the Europe wants to do for all kind of other, objectives. Okay, so are they redundant? So let's first look at the fiscal stance. So on the fiscal stance, the calculation, there have been several calculations, okay, on the old proposals. On the December proposal, the calculation that Bruegel has done on the fiscal stance shows that they are quite stringent, but as I said, not as stringent as it would have been under the old Stability and Growth Pact. But both the calculation made in December and the ones which have been made right now, just after, you know, the last few days, what comes out is that actually the safeguards are mostly redundant, okay? And especially they are redundant for Italy. They are not redundant for France. And actually, and the reason is because, as I said before, the debt sustainability analysis is already quite stringent. The reason why they are not redundant for France, but they are redundant for Italy, is because because France does quite well in terms of the debt sustainability analysis, because it has a higher structural growth than Italy, especially because of population dynamics. And therefore, doing well for DSA means that then it is a higher probability that you're going to get hit with the safeguard, which tells you exactly why the safeguards are nonsensical, not only from the micro perspective, but also for the macro perspective. Now, on the last numbers, you know, talking about the debt safeguards are binding only for Finland, Spain, and France, and the deficit safeguards are binding only for Greece and Poland. So again, they seem to be redundant. However, this should not be they should not give us too much room for comfort, because even for Italy and France and Spain, which, you know, for which the deficit safeguards are not binding. For those three countries, it is possible that it's very actually high probable that by the end of the adjustment period, so in 2028 or 2031, the structural deficit at that point will be larger than 1.5%, and the debt will be larger than 60%. And therefore, the new plan, the second plan after the first under the new regime, will have to respect to the deficit safeguard. This is telling you that from a stance point of view, the fiscal stance overall, because we are talking here about the three large countries of the euro area, the euro area overall will have a very tight fiscal stance in the years to come. And so we will have to worry about also the coordination between monetary and fiscal policy in that respect. Another problem is procyclicality, because the safeguards may matter a lot ex post in the scenarios in which the economic growth will be, you know, not as sustained as in the current Commission projection, because these calculations are based on the Commission projections on economic growth. So, to summarize, both on the stance and on procyclicality, we are not in a good situation. And in general, you know, beside whatever the rules you want to design, without a central fiscal capacity, we will also be in a situation in which the fiscal rules will lead to procyclicality. And there is no way, we are no way, you know, even near to an agreement to a central fiscal capacity. So final comment is the problem of strategic investment. That was a problem that was very much dear to the parliament and to the, you know, to the negotiations carried by the parliament. So and this is why the parliament originally required the deviation from the national medium-term fiscal structure from the national medium-term fiscal structural plans in relation to the strategic investment. Okay, so, but actually, in my view, this was the wrong way to negotiate, because if we are talking about strategic investment, then they need to be included in the plans. So this is exactly the logic that is the logic of Marcello's paper. Okay, from the point of view of a contract design, you want, you know, if you think strategic investment are important, they're important for growth, they have to be in the medium-term plans. They shouldn't be outside, because, you know, we are talking about the center is exactly this, that sustainability analysis, which in principle is pro-growth, okay? Because, you know, growth is good for that sustainability analysis. So in any case, it was the wrong way to negotiate, but in any case, you know, they didn't get anything, so it's irrelevant. And so I would conclude that, yes, we are in a better place than we used to be. So the conclusions are the same as the one that drawn by Marcello's, but, you know, I would add that, you know, a contra-theory perspective is not sufficient to understand whether this set of rules are good or not. And so, you know, I wanted to complement with my macro perspective. Thanks.
Thank you, Lucrezia, for completing this gloomy picture that Marcello started to draw, and you completed it. So we have some time for questions and comments. So either you write your question in the chat, or you raise your hand, your digital hand, if you want to intervene. Obviously, if whenever Daniel Gross want to make any comments, he is more than welcome as usual. So don't be shy. I mean, there are more than 40 people, so it's time to intervene. In the meanwhile, maybe I have a question for you both. What relevance will have this net expenditure indicator in the new framework? So I still struggle to understand. I mean, I'm a journalist, so from the media perspective, what we will discuss about in the next years about the Stability and Growth Pact, what will be the indicator in the titles? What will be that will have the most consequential political impact in terms of binding decisions? And the second question is for Marcello's approach. I mean, we saw in the Italian case the five-star movement voting against the new treaty on the ESM, which was something that they approved when they were in the government a few years ago. So is it true that this idea of ownership is binding across, is binding for more than the single year? I mean, if the government changes and if parties who used to be bounded by this, the ownership of the plan, that they go to the opposition and opposition parties get to power, is it true that the ownership means that the plan is binding? Okay, these are my questions, but I mean, I ask, don't do like in class. Then I'm not supposed to invite you on in person. But I mean, if you want, we can invite you individually afterwards. Okay.
But Daniel raised his hand.
Daniel raised the hand. I don't see him. Okay, Daniel. So Daniel, the floor is yours, and then they will reply.
I don't hear him.
We don't hear Daniel. I ask Flaminia and Silvia if everything is fine for technical.
Daniel, unmute yourself.
Okay. Now
Okay.
here I am.
Here you
Sorry.
go.
Here you are. Okay.
And many thanks to both presenters. It's interesting to have these two presentations. One of the questions you had, I would also have asked about the ownership, which changes over time. If I'm not mistaken, most of the discussion is focused on the transition period, the various safeguards which have to be added to the transition period, which could be short for many countries, right? It's just the problem countries that probably will ask for longer a transition period. But shouldn't we start from the steady state, from the very end? Right, so I've heard very little discussion about the steady state, because that actually, if properly implemented, should make many of the safeguards superfluous. Because I presume when you're already then on a declining debt path, then all what came before is already by definition almost fulfilled.
Shall we
Okay.
answer or?
Yeah. Maybe you
Yeah.
should answer, and we wait for the next round of questions.
Well, I just wanted to ask answer to Daniel. Then I'll get Marcello get the questions because they are for him. But on the safeguard, they are redundant. In fact, the safeguards are redundant.
Yeah.
They're redundant almost in any case, except for. I mean, the main thing is that the debt is not redundant for France because France is doing well on the DSA. So, so I mean, I think that exactly so that we should have a realistic and well-designed DSA analysis, and then to have the safeguards, it is something that is there just because there is a lack of trust, okay? And so then you want to, to make sure that things don't go wrong, because I think from the point of view of certain member states, they do not believe that the Commission will enforce the DSA analysis. These are why so it's just a manifestation of the lack of trust. But if you do the calculation, they're actually redundant because the DSA is tough enough.
Okay, thank you, Lucrezia. Marcello?
Yes, many thanks. First of all, let me thank Lucrezia. I guess that we are in very large agreement. I fully agree that a microeconomic perspective is insufficient in order to appreciate the impact of fiscal rules. Hence, I'm aware that it's necessary to combine micro and macro perspective. Let me just specify one point. I guess that it's possible to find a strong connection in terms of rule versus risk methodology, in the sense that the risk approach followed by European Commission is, how do you say, compatible with the approach followed to implement recovery and resilience facility, that is Next Generation EU. Hence, it's possible to micro-found the macro perspective of a central fiscal capacity by emphasizing risk methodology versus rule methodology. And we have, in this sense, another example of the fact that the trade-off between micro and macro is not so severe in this case. The improvements at the micro level can have a good and positive impact also at the macro level. The point is exactly the point raised by Lucrezia. We cannot conceive the implementation of the new fiscal rules with the restrictive fiscal impact for a medium-long term without developing a central fiscal capacity. The substantial trade-off is between implementation of the new fiscal rules and possibility or impossibility to implement a strong and permanent central fiscal capacity. It seems to me that the new fiscal rules represent an improvement, just if this is the first step for a reform of the economic governance, a larger reform of economic governance in terms of developing central fiscal capacity and the related production of European public goods. And this is, in my view, the tool to combine micro and macro and to avoid a negative fiscal stance. Maybe there is just a few difference between Lucrezia and I with respect to the role played by net expenditures. In my view, net expenditures is a good idea, but it's just a unit of measure. It's a unit of account. It's not more than that. from a micro and macro point of view, net expenditure is just another way to specify structural deficit. It's difficult for me to understand the macro difference between net expenditure and a threshold in terms of net public deficit, but for the fact that net expenditure is a simplification. Hence, it's a good idea to have an homogeneous unit of account. I agree with Stefano that there are stronger links than expected between the possibility to implement national ownership and, how do you say, to have a reasonable bargaining with the European Commission in terms of debt sustainability, and the problem of the ESM. In a sense, it's possible, and let me go back to the problem of central fiscal capacity. In a sense, it's possible to have an expansionary fiscal stance just if we have a central fiscal capacity, but also the possibility to mobilize private wealth. It's inconceivable to have an implementation of the green and digital transition without a combination between a permanent central fiscal capacity and a mobilization of financial wealth in terms of supporting these transitions. Hence, ESM is crucial in the sense that it's impossible to complete the banking union and to make operative a unified European financial market, that is a capital markets union, without completing the second pillar of banking union. And ESM is not crucial, but nevertheless it's unavoidable to approve ESM in order to complete the second pillar. Hence, the relationship is stronger than expected, and I agree with Stefano. I also agree with a part of Daniel Gross. Lucrezia already answered to Daniel on one of the points that he raised, but let me emphasize the point in which I'm in agreement with Daniel, that is the importance and the distortion and impact of the transition period. From this point of view, let me simplify matter. Let me assume that France, Italy, and other countries will be put under EDP by the European Commission in a few months. This means that Italy will be able to reduce, to weaken fiscal adjustments by means of the transitionary period, even under EDP. This means that, other things being equal, Italy will start the first national plan with worse public debt on GDP. And it would be quite difficult to meet adjustment trajectory in these conditions. So my suggestion is it would be better not to exploit the distortionary possibilities of the transition period. From this point of view, and I stop here, I agree with Lucrezia that it's not a good idea, it's not a victory of the Parliament to exclude co-financed investments from national expenditures, in the sense that if we agree that investment and reforms in the medium long term have a positive impact on the rate of growth, well, we should include investments in the national expenditure. You know, as economists, you know very well that a longer horizon means already a better perspective for investment. So it seems to me a double count in a sense. 7 years is the possibility of national plans, including investment reforms. This is already the positive move to incentivize investments. We do not need to exclude confinance investment from national expenditures from this point of view. I stop here.
Thank you, Marcello. We have very few minutes left, but 2 questions. One from Rosalba Fama. This is for Lucrezia. Do you think that against the position of Italy during the negotiations, asking to keep green investment outside, the same criticism you raised with regard to the Parliament? That is the question in the chat that you can read as well. And there is a comment or a question by Massimo Bordignon who raised his hand. I just ask you to be brief because we have just a few minutes, 5 minutes, and then we have to say goodbye.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the discussion. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Perfectly.
Yeah, very quick question. I mean, the first one is to Marcello. I mean, this idea, I wanted you to explain, to expand a bit more on this idea of incentive compatible, because of course this is what all of us hope. Now the fact that I present my own project, so I have an incentive to follow it. But of course, you might think in many cases, which then exposed, you might want to reconsider or rebergen your proposal. To Lucrezia, I don't know, it depends on probably on the kind of forecast assumption that one make, but this idea that they are all redundant, I agree that the one on the debt is redundant, particularly because they start after the transition period. I'm a bit more in trouble with the deficit rule because indeed, for example, the other day I was presented by some forecast by the L'Ufficio Parlamentare di Bilancio, in which, for example, Italy had to reach in a higher deficit primary surplus of 1 point more with the deficit rule than without the deficit rule. And my final point was exactly to say, so given that the deficit rule is the one which creates more problem, what do you think about the Lucio Pench argument that this deficit rule is not legally compatible and so it cannot be enforced? Stop. Thank you.
5 minutes for both to answer these 2 questions. Marcello.
Lucrezia, it's up to you.
I don't see Lucrezia anymore, but I think she's here.
Okay.
Lucrezia is still with us? We don't know.
Pardon me?
No, I was looking for Lucrezia, but since I cannot find her...
Yeah, Lucrezia is not here. She lost the connection, I guess. Okay. I try to answer to Massimo's question. First question: how can we maintain that Commission proposal are compatible with incentive compatibility, whereas the Stability and Growth Pact is not? Well, this is a very simple rule of counter theory. That is, with incomplete information, it's impossible to have a good implementation of fixed rules. That is, the enforcement of fixed rules is impossible, in the sense that either you are able as a principal to check ex post all the actions taken by the agent, or you should incentivize the agent to follow your better or your preferred setting. The Pench question, that is the legal weakness of one of the safeguards introduced by the new fiscal rules. It seems to me that this point is quite complex, in the sense that if I correctly read the proposal of the EU Council, the safeguards do not directly enter into the new rules, but they enter through DSA. And DSA is not a constraining decision taken by the European Commission, but it's just, how do you say, a framework, a suggestion made by the Commission to national countries in order to start a bargaining between national countries and the Commission itself. So it's subtle than it seems. So it's a very complex question. I'm not obviously I'm not an expert on legal problems, but it seems to me quite complex to answer to this question.
But I hear one question, which was, is the Parliament negotiation strategy had the same limitation as the Italian negotiation strategy? Yes, my opinion is this is the same mistake, because you know, if you believe that on the principle of the debt sustainability analysis and the medium-term growth path plan that you have to submit, I mean, everything should be in there, okay? Anything that matters for structural growth should be in there, it should be part of that conversation. That's one question. Massimo, I'm surprised about, I should check the calculation by the Ufficio Parlamentare di Bilancio, because I just have under my nose the new numbers which have been calculated by Bruegel on the basis of the Commission forecast, and you know, at least for the next for the adjustment period, both for the 4th and 7th adjustment periods, they don't matter for Italy. Okay, so they matter for some countries, but not for Italy. As I said, for those, on the basis of those calculations, they would matter for the second phase, for the second adjustment, if Italy will find itself at the end of that adjustment period with a structural deficit larger than 1.5%. So I should check with the Ufficio Parlamentare di Bilancio. But okay, so these are the numbers. But I don't have anything else to add. And apologies for the technical problems.
No worries. So thank you, Lucrezia, for your final comment. As you all know now, I mean, this matter is even much more complex than you thought before this webinar, but I think that this conversation was very helpful to, I mean, to shape our approach to this issue and to get some new and fresh perspective. So thank you very much to Lucrezia and to Marcello both for the paper and for the webinar. So I just have to remember you to subscribe the YEP newsletter so you can receive all updates on publications and on next event. And we have a list of very interesting events, both in person and digital on the website, so please check them out. And I thank you all, and I just have to say goodbye and see you next time.
Bye, thank you.
Bye-bye, thank you so much. Bye.